Good evening and welcome to tonight's 6 at 6 lecture. I'm Shauna Riley from the Scripps Howard Center at Northern Kentucky University, and it is my opportunity to talk about our second presenter of this season. This is our 15th season for the 6 at 6 series. The 6 at 6 series is an opportunity to bring NKU faculty into the community to interesting places to talk about their research and to engage the community. So this evening, we're joined by Dr. Monica Wakefield from the Sociology, Anthropology, and Philosophy. We talk about it as SAP, but yet I still didn't get it in the right order. Department. She's the director of anthropology and an associate professor. Monica's research is really cool. You guys are in for a great treat tonight. But when she talks about her research interests, ecology, primatology, lots of other human ecology, big things like this, just small questions in the world. And so it's kind of a fun topic to talk about her work in Kenya and her work on growing up baboon. We're joined tonight by Norse Media. They are our production team in the back. They'll be wandering around, and so that is why we're using a microphone, even though you can probably hear us here in the audience. So when you have a question, just sort of flag me and I'll come running over, literally with the mic, so that the folks can hear you at home. If you're at home, you can put questions in the chat and they'll come to my phone and I'll ask them for you. So we'll be able to do it that way. And with that, Dr. Wakefield.
Great. Thank you, Shauna. Thanks everybody who braved the rain tonight to come out to the talk, see it in person. And thanks, Shauna, for inviting me and the production crew and Devin, all the organization. I really appreciate it. So as Shauna told you, so I'm in this, SAP department in the anthropology specifically. I'm a biological anthropologist, and within that, I'm a primatologist. So I study living non-human primates. And I'm going to be talking to you today about some of my latest research on olive baboons in Kenya. These are works that are in progress right now. And so I'm going to be giving you some of the preliminary results that we have. The first half is mostly results that come out of my work with undergraduate students, so that you'll be seeing. And this is in the morning at one of the baboon sleeping sites in Kenya. There, that I show you here. So first, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why we study primates, especially as an anthropologist, why people study primates, what are some of the things we can learn from them. And then I'm going to talk to you about the two different topics I have. They are related, but also a little different. First, about the research on juvenile social development in baboons, and then about the transition, at least for females, from the juvenile phase through puberty into sexual maturity, so the age at first menstruation or menarche, and some of the ecological correlates with that. All right, so just to tell you a little bit about my work and what I do. So I've been studying different primate species in Africa, over 25 years now, since 1998, first with Western lowland gorillas, and then later I moved on to studying for my dissertation work over here on the right, chimpanzees in Uganda, and I was studying female chimpanzee social relationships and started my focus on the evolution of social behavior at that time. Later, over here on the left, I went to the DRC a few times to study wild bonobos, and in that picture, that is pre-dawn, sun's not up, and I'm standing under, or squatting, I guess, under bonobo nests collecting fecal samples. Very glamorous. And then now since 2021, I've been working on my current project, the picture there in the middle, on olive baboons in this area in Laikipia, Kenya. And I should explain that picture a little bit, since that baboon is pretty close. This was my first summer. It was midday, equatorial sun out, getting really hot. The baboons were all spread grasses in an area with really no trees. And we found this one little acacia tree giving this tiny little bit of shade. And so my collaborator and I decided to sit down and take a break in the shade while the baboons were just eating. And I heard a noise behind me, and this little juvenile was sitting up on this rock staring at me. And then in a few minutes, other baboons started noticing the nice shade, and eventually we had to get up and leave because the baboons were taken over the space. But yeah, normally I would not be that close to a baboon, but you know, took the opportunity to get that picture. Okay, so why do we study primates? Well, first of all, and what got me personally into studying primates is they are fascinating animals with extremely intricate behavioral repertoires, a lot of diversity and variation across different primates, and just really fascinating animals. Most are endangered species. And so I really think they're worth studying in their own right. But the other reason, particularly from the anthropology perspective, is that we ourselves, our own species, are primates, meaning we belong to the mammalian order called primates with all the other different primates. And so studying primates in the wild gives us opportunity to get a lot of information about ourselves, and particularly how and why we evolved certain attributes that we wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And by studying these other primates, our close living relatives here, we can apply what we call the comparative method. And there's a couple different approaches to the comparative method. So for example, you all may have already heard that chimpanzees are humans' closest living relatives, right? So when he didn't want to walk in and interrupt me. He's my chair, it's okay, he can interrupt me. Chimpanzees are our closest living relatives. Bonobos also fall into that category. But so there's been a lot of research on chimpanzees going, okay, so what behaviors we share with chimpanzees mean we shared with our last common ancestor, right? But we shouldn't be limited to just our closest living relatives, I say as an ex-chimpanzee researcher, because using that comparative method of what we call homology to look at shared ancestral pasts, we could push dates back even further if we look at other species. So for example, the pointer doesn't really show on the screen, so I'll just come back here and point. Here you see this lineage here that separates at about 25 million years. Those are the old world monkeys, of which baboons belong to. So if we can identify traits that we see in the apes, we see in the old world monkeys, we see in us. We can push the evolution of those traits back to 25 plus million years ago, that those traits existed, or attributes of those traits have existed that far back and very deep rooted in our evolutionary history. Even traits that we share that other species don't sometimes evolve because of shared selective pressures. So species sharing similar attributes, you can ask about what other similarities are there in their lives environment that may have led to these similar traits being evolved, and answer questions that way. And it was slow to switch, so I went one too much. Okay, and I just want to give you an example that is directly related to my area of research of evolution of social behavior. And as with a lot of science, we don't really always know what we're going to find out when we set out and how much it can apply to people and public health and things like that. One thing that we have learned in the last decade or two, starting with research on baboons specifically, is that, so we already know that we are a very social species. And the primates are all very social species with complex social relationships. And we all, the primates and ourselves included, have evolved with these social relationships as an adaptation. The quality of good social relationships and face-to-face relationships in humans, and including physical touch, has impacts on our health, our longevity, our survivorship, our ability to reproduce successfully. Well, this actually goes all the way back deep into our roots. So we now know from baboon research, where it started and it's been extended to some other species, that the same goes for them. They vary, individuals vary in the quality of their relationships. And it turns out individuals with few but high quality friends and strong relationships are going to have lower stress levels. lower cortisol, stress hormone levels. They're going to do better in a stressful situation, recover faster. Their health is better. Infant mortality among those individuals is lower for females. So they have better lifetime reproductive success. They live longer. They generally have better survivability. So, and this isn't just interactions in the primate world. That is measured by physical contact that I'm going to be talking about today, a behavior called grooming, where they sit together and pick through each other's hair and pull out debris and parasites. Obviously, it's a hygienic function, but for primates, that has it's the most important social behavior they have, affiliative social behavior. They develop and maintain social bonds through these activities, and that physical contact is really important. So when we look at more recent years, this starting really in the digital age, we as a species have started to become more separate from each other, less face-to-face interaction. And of course, it came to a big peak in 2020, 2021, when we were all isolating and we started seeing increases in both mental and physical health issues beyond COVID, the obvious one. But it still continues, even now that we're out. They're in the world we live in today, we can very easily go out about our day without having a single physical interaction with another human being. If we need if we need money, we go to the bank. We don't even enter the bank. We get our money from the ATM. We no longer go inside and have that moment of exchange with a human being. And there's research that shows that that is affecting our mental health. That individuals who do still have those types of interactions on a regular basis are happier, right? So what this tells us in terms of a public health perspective is that we can't just adapt in a few years to this new way of life. It is deep rooted in our evolutionary past. We have evolved and adapted for this. And it is now becoming, in my opinion, a very public health concern. Me being somebody who isolates myself all the time and didn't even notice the difference during COVID, but yet this is what I study, and I think it's something we should be paying more attention to. All right, so to talk about the first part of my research, looking at the social development in the juveniles of the olive baboons here. And I already mentioned grooming, which you see some examples of here. Here's a juvenile grooming an adult male. These are two juveniles grooming each other. These guys aren't grooming. They're napping in the morning after coming down from their sleeping site when it was still really cold, and they'll cuddle. They like to cuddle, especially when it's cold, but even when it's not. There was one I didn't point out, like that one. That's a male and a female friend. Males and females form strong bonds with each other, and they are just cuddling up and so adorably. Okay. So let's talk about the juvenile stage and why I am studying that phase. Well, first of all, to define it, the juvenile stage is a life history phase between weaning, so becoming nutritionally independent from the mother, up until hitting puberty or sexual maturity. And it is unique among mammals, primates are really unique among mammals, that is an extended period, lasting years. You can see for the group that baboons are in, 6-ish years, right? Even longer, 6, 7 for the apes. Obviously, humans, we have the longest relative juvenile period. We call that childhood, right? So this really is the equivalent of childhood in humans. And the only other mammals that have any sort of extended period beyond weaning and then being independent nutritionally and then reproducing are social carnivores. So that is interesting also that we can think about with this. So the question is, why did this life history phase evolve, right? We would think that in terms of natural selection, the earlier you start reproducing as an individual within any given species, the greater your lifetime reproductive success is going to be. So why have this? I think I hit a button. There we go. So why have this extended period that's only going to delay time to reproduction? Well, we do know that the length of the juvenile period is correlated with brain size, for example, particularly the relative size of the neocortex to the rest of the brain, the neocortex being the most recently evolved part of the brain and the area responsible for like higher reasoning and thinking. Body size it correlates with as well. So, there is maybe this time just needed for extra brain growth, maybe in motor skill development, but that still doesn't entirely explain what is happening during the juvenile period and what else is evolutionary beneficial to get during that phase. And so why is this time important? Why did it evolve? And there are some different hypotheses for this with primates. The main one is this is time to learn important skills that are necessary to be a successful adult. And one of those is social competency, especially in these species that have very complex, intricate social relationships with other individuals in the group, right? Group size also correlates with longevity too, because the larger group size, the more you have to keep track of relationships of different individuals. Not only your relationships with different individuals, but third-party relationships. Bob and Tom are enemies, so you don't want to hang out when they're close together if they start fighting, right? So all of these calculations that go into being a successful adult socially. Personally, I think that is the most important reason. The other one out there looks at foraging complexity as well, which certainly can be a part of it. Learning how to eat foods from your mother and other individuals before you have to survive on your own. But these are social animals who are always together anyway. But primates are very rarely specialists, right? They are more dietary generalists. So certainly, and they do a lot of extractive foraging, getting foods that aren't visible to the eye. So certainly there is definitely some merit to that idea. However, these hypotheses really haven't been tested. There's been some what we call meta-analyses. We're just taking some basic information like longevity and brain size and group size from all different primates and throw them into a big statistical model that suggests these are the case. However, it's not really been tested by actually observing juvenile primates in the wild and collecting data on what they're doing with that time. Juveniles are the most understudied demographic in primates across the board. And it was in the early 2000s where the calls were being put out for people to start studying juveniles, but it's still very rare. And in fact, at the research site where I'm doing my research that started in 1973, 50 years ago, in 1984 at its current location on this population, I am the first person to do any research on juveniles. Every other demographic has been the focus of research except for juveniles. So it's a great opportunity to test these hypotheses, and all the baboons, they are really perfect candidates for this. They do live in large social groups. More typical is around 40 or 50 or so. That 170 number, that was the size of our troop when I first started in 2021, which is very large. And so they do have these complex social relationships with lots of different individuals to keep track of. But they also are omnivorous. They'll eat whatever they can get their hands on that doesn't kill them. And they are always learning to incorporate new novel foods into their environment, especially in anthropogenically changed habitats where you get new food sources coming in and longtime food sources dying off, right? And so they're always experimenting with different foods. This has made them a very successful group of primates. They can adapt to a lot of different habitats. They're really quite widespread in their range, and olive baboons are one of the very few primate species that aren't even listed as threatened. So they don't really have a lot of protective status. Makes it hard to get funding to study them, by the way. Oh, they aren't endangered? No. So, as I mentioned before, grooming is a great place to look at the development of these relationships. Who and how much they're choosing to groom with, for example. And when we look at the adults, there's marked sex differences in grooming patterns and relationship patterns. So females as adults, like these two these are those actually happen to be a mother-daughter pair that are grooming each other on the top while their infants are playing. So females will groom quite frequently with other females, adult females, not just relatives, also non-relative friends as well, and their own offspring and offspring of female friends. Whereas males typically will only groom with their female friends, these ones who they have these long-lasting heterosexual relationships with that are mutually beneficial to both the male and the female. Male might get more mating opportunities, female gets some protection. The males will only groom with those female friends and their infant and juvenile offspring. He'll groom with them as well. However, the males are pretty lazy when it comes to actually doing the grooming, right? There's two sides to grooming. There's the active part, giving the grooming, and then there's the passive part, being the receiver. The males prefer to be the passive players in this role, as you see with this male y'all here being groomed by the female, and he's just chilling. And I have to think of this next slide. Okay, next slide, I think I have a video of some grooming. So it can be actually quite relaxing and pleasurable to the receiver, especially if they're comfortable with the baboon grooming them. They can get they sometimes even fall asleep. They almost get into, the groomer and the groomee both can get into almost a meditative Zen-like state in the process. And then it also triggers the release of, happy neuroendocrine hormones. So things like oxytocin and endorphins and all those good things. All right, so the Waso and Giro Baboon Project, where I do my research, like I said, was at this location started in 1984 after translocating baboons that had been studied since 1973 at a different locality where they were all going to be killed. So they got translocated to this locality. Dr. Shirley Strum is the amazing researcher who did this, who started in 1973, was a real pioneer in this area of research. And she is still occasionally comes to the field. She's in her late 70s and in this process of retiring. And so invited myself and a couple of my colleagues who are now the co-directors of the project and doing research there. The population that I'm studying, the current troop, has been continuously monitored since 1984. So over 40 years of data. Baboons typically only live 20 is about an old for a baboon. So we're talking descendants at this point. But almost all the individuals, except for a male who might transfer in, had data collected on them from birth to now or death. So we're in the central area of Kenya. You can see here in Laikipia, but the olive baboon range, this is kind of on the edge of their range there in East Africa. So, and starting in 2022, I've become one of the co-directors. So during this time, the NAMU troop, that's the name of the troop we follow currently, has ranged from 100 to 170 individuals. Starting at the higher end, we're now a little over 100. In 2019, 2020, a severe drought started that lasted over 3 years. And during that time, we lost a lot of individuals, most likely to predation, because a lot of the zebra, the buffalo, they were all dying off, so the predators started to go to baboons to eat. The baboons were actually doing pretty reasonably well in terms of finding food, a little bit skinny. So we're a little smaller now. And the data that I'm going to be using today started being collected in January 2022. And I just want to acknowledge the people who have collected the bulk of this data. There is data being collected year-round, whether or not myself or other researchers are at the site, by our amazing team of Kenyan field observers. You see here in front of White Rocks, one of the baboons' beautiful sleeping sites there, and they're absolutely amazing at what they do. And then NKU graduate there holding a giraffe skull, that is Ansley Cahill. She has been out to the field a few times, spending I think a total of maybe 8 months out there. And she is actually the one who, in 2024, I started focal data collection on the juveniles, and she got the researchers trained and got them ready. And even when I'm in the field, I'm not collecting data on the juveniles because frankly, at this point, I'm too old to keep up with a juvenile baboon over rocky terrain. So I'm following females and my assistants collect the data on the juveniles for me. Oh, yeah, it's a pretty amazing place. It's pretty comfortable and quite beautiful comfortable compared to other places I've worked. And we have lots of other animals that we do encounter on a daily basis. Giraffes are my favorite. You can tell because there's 2 pictures up there. And let's see, those are Grevy's zebra. They are an extremely endangered species of zebra that can only be found in that region, in this region of Kenya. There are also the more common plains zebra there as well. There's a silverback jackal up there and a lot of elephants. For better or for worse, obviously, it's always really cool to see an elephant from a safe distance. But unfortunately, the baboons have no reason to fear elephants, so they will lead us right into herds of elephants if we aren't careful. So we often have to interrupt our day and stop following because of elephants for our own safety. And in fact, this picture here, this was from last summer. I was walking up, that's the top of a hill. I was walking up on a road to walk back to the car and I was out alone. And I get to the top of the hill and I hear something in the brush and I look over and there's that big bull elephant there. And he looks at me and starts flapping his ears, which is elephant threat. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll turn around and go back down the hill. And then I turned around and looked and he was coming out on the road and he started to follow me down the road. And of course, what do you do when you're being followed by a bull elephant? You stop and take a picture. I figure if I'm going down, might as well have evidence of it, right? Obviously, he kept following me, but I managed to get off to the road and climb up some rocks until he got tired and moved on. So, okay, so this research on juveniles all actually started with this amazing group of NKU undergraduates who ended up with me forming what we now call the NKU Baboon Project. We even have a logo designed by one of the students who I've worked with. It started out, all the data collected by our observers in the field is collected by hand. And before you can analyze it, it has to be entered into Excel. So some students joined me to get some course credit entering data. But you're entering data, you start to learn about it, you start to ask questions. And they all wanted to start analyzing, doing some projects on it. And I said, okay, well, you know what? Nobody is studying the juveniles. Let's just do some projects on juvenile. We have this grooming data that's just kind of, they scan around and they write down who grooms with who. Let's take a look at some juvenile grooming. And so then over the years, I've had all of these students since 2022, obviously not all at the same time, have worked with me on this research and have done their own projects on various aspects of juvenile grooming from different times of the data that we had. So they're carving out different chunks of it to analyze. And first presentation was in spring 2023. And since then, these students have had first author presentations at 16 different conferences on their research. So I'm extremely proud of them and the work that they've been doing. It was actually established 2022. I put the wrong year there, just so you know. And in addition to the research, they also took it upon themselves to do a lot of fundraising efforts when they heard about the work that we do with the community, the project, the UNBP project does with the community in the area where the baboons are. Baboons, they aren't in a protected area, our study community. They range on private land and community land. And so these wonderful people in the area allow us to be there. And it's a very difficult place for them. It's a very difficult time, especially after the severe drought. So we do whatever we can to give back. For example, the children were going hungry at the peak of the drought, and the only food they would get was when they were at school during the day, but the school started running out of food and money for food, so we raised money to buy porridge for the school. Or we worked with this women's collective of Maasai women called Twala, who we also work with them, the community. This last summer, I organized some students to go and work with the secondary school students, the local secondary school, the conservation club, to learn about primates. And we had an essay and art contest. One of the pieces of art is down there in the lower left. And after doing two different sessions with them, we took, about 20 different students at different times out to the baboons with us. They see baboons all the time. They live among them, but they don't know. People don't understand or know baboons in the area. They think they're just nasty, fighting. They don't know about their social relationships. They're kind of considered pests. And just 1 hour with them completely changes your mind when you see them interacting and being social with each other. So then these students become ambassadors for the baboons in the community. They're often killed by locals, so it's important for that. Okay, so then to get back to the specific research on the development of the social relationships, in this case looking at grooming, to see if this is an important period of time for the baboons to establish these relationships, to see how they change over time, to see at what time we start to see them develop the sex-typic differences that we see into adulthood. And so first the students, they had to enter the handwritten data into Excel, and then they had to extract from that any data that involved juveniles, at least one juvenile, either as the groomer or the groomee. And they then at different times analyzed different subsets of the data. My next plan is at the end of 2025, I'm going to have a solid 4 years of data, and I'm working with Ansley, the student there, and another current student, Lily, to compile and do all these analyses based on 4 years worth of data to submit a paper for publication. All right, just want to point out Abby is one of the people who has worked with entering all the data, and she's here today. So what I'm going to show you, some of the results. Oh, first we're going to watch some juveniles groom each other. I have the sound muted because I'm talking in it. You don't need to hear me go, oh wait, which one is this? So these are two juvenile males, and this was a really unusual case. You see that's Shorty laying down, relaxing, currently being groomed by Ferguson. These are actually two orphans. So they both lost their mother when they were about 1 year old, and they both survived because they were adopted by adult males who, took them under their wings. But our group is starting to fission that I'm going to talk about, split into two smaller groups at the end of the drought when they couldn't find enough food, right? And we had one group of about 100, one group of about 30. They're starting to come back together now. As of this summer, they're starting to sleep together and spend more time together. Those two juveniles ended up on different sides of the subgroups who were hostile to each other for a while. And they spent, on this day, I watched them for about half an hour grooming each other. So that's not a typical grooming dyad we see. So all of these results that I'm going to show you now, these are results of the students' work that they did with me. And I'm grabbing their results directly from their presentations, either their posters or their slides, if they gave an oral presentation. So I've kept the integrity of the color schemes the students have chosen, everything in these. So you're going to see a lot of variation in how they look. But first, I want to talk about some of the sex difference results that we have found with this research. Well, first of all, we have found that however we look at it, females spend more time grooming than males. Okay, not terribly surprised by that, but the magnitude did certainly surprise us, especially the big difference with how much female grooming of the grooming that the female is the active one, the one giving the groom for female juveniles compared to male juveniles, who typically would much rather be on the receiving end of grooming. Don't worry about these different colors right now. I'll zoom into this in a little bit. Those are just different types of categories of partners that they're grooming with. But from here, you can see this is a statistically significant result. Females both play the active role more than males and also groom on the receiving end more than males. And this is just from a few months of data that Ansley was able to collect on focaling the juveniles to actually find how they're breaking down their day, what % of their time they spend doing different activities. And here you see this is the amount of time they devote to grooming, and female juveniles are devoting twice the amount of time throughout their day to grooming than males are. And the biggest difference is, so that non-grooming social interaction, play would be in there. Males might be playing slightly more, but the biggest difference is males are resting more. That's where the females are losing time to grooming. So it is an investment, right? It is a trade-off with other times they could be doing other activities. And this is from a different year of data than the other one, but it nicely illustrates that difference I was talking about in giving and receiving. Okay, so this first one graph was all of the juvenile grooming bouts for a year, and this is when they were giving. Females are the pink, males are the gray. You can see that females were giving grooming much more grooming, and males were receiving more here. But when we come over to their grooming with only their mother, that's where we start to see, oh, these mama boys. That is how much they were grooming, that little gray bar, how much they were giving groom to their mother compared to receiving. Now, the juveniles in this year also received grooming from their mother more than they were giving, but they gave this so much more than the males. The males barely grooming their moms. And this was then another just a few months study we did to compare. So we were collecting data. The grooming data we were using were just 2 individuals were seeing grooming, and it was recorded. That was it. We don't know how long. Grooming can last 30 seconds. It can last 40 minutes, right? And so maybe females aren't actually grooming more, just males they groom more frequent bouts and males groom for longer durations, for example. So we wanted to get some durational data. Now this is being collected much more thoroughly ongoing in the data. But it turns out that the longest mean grooming sessions here were, this was, vary by groomer. Why didn't it not pop up? Let's see. There it is. So the longest average duration went to bouts where the females were the ones giving grooming. They were playing the active role, were the longest duration periods. So this is preliminary data because it's not a huge sample size. However, it does appear that not only are females grooming more, they're grooming longer as well than males. There's also sex differences in preferred partners. And by preferred partner, what I mean is this is done by calculating an index of who their grooming partners are, how much they groom relative to how much both members of the dyad groom other ones, and you get this index of relative grooming preference. And we defined preferred as anything more than 1 standard deviation above the population mean. And not terribly surprising, you can see females in the red bars if they have a mother still alive, the mother's their preferred grooming partner across the juveniles. This one came as a surprise to us. If males have a brother, the brother's their preferred grooming partner. And that came as a surprise to us because males typically transfer at adolescence, and they sometimes might transfer with a brother, right? But they are not investing necessarily in lifelong relationships the way females are. And so we were surprised to see them groom with a brother, but we're having something odd happening the last few years at our site. Males aren't leaving. They're staying. And we're also having very few new males joining. And so most of our breeding age males now are actually natal, born in the community, which is really odd. And we do have now adult brother dyads who are occasionally grooming, which was unheard of before. So I don't know if we're getting some shift. Probably has to do with the large troop size. They don't have to be as concerned about inbreeding avoidance. But so it's gonna be interesting to watch that play out. This shows the similar, but also adding in age differences and how some of the other types, unrelated individuals, male sibling, female sibling, with their grooming preferences. We divided the juveniles into 2 classes, young and old, so we could get at we didn't have enough data to do it like yearly, right? But with young and old, we can see how it changes over time. And both young and old males prefer their brother, females still prefer their mother, but we'll zoom in on some other changes that happen. Older females increase the number of grooming partners. So they're expanding their grooming network beyond first their mom and their mom's friends and their siblings or close aunts, things like that. Whereas males are not expanding their grooming network as they age. And here we see the same breakdown of age, and this is who they're grooming with when they aren't grooming direct kin relatives. So anything beyond mother, sibling, aunt, things like that. Oh no, this is, sorry, that's the next one. This is kin beyond the mother. And you can see older females are also increasing that, but it's not that extreme. Males seem to almost be decreasing kin with the mother. Now we look at non-kin grooming patterns, and what you see is those older females. They're again significantly expanding their grooming their grooming relationships beyond the maternal unit. So I mentioned the fission going on, and that is happening. That started noticeably in 2022. That about June 2022, we were seeing these groups clearly forage separately. They started sleeping at different sites, right? They have different rocky sites they sleep on where it's safe from predators. And they started sometimes sleeping at different sites. And so one of my students took a look at, and past research has looked at, female-female grooming relationships, and if it can predict the split at the fission lines, and if they're splitting up friends, things like that. Nobody's ever included the juveniles in this. And so she looked at the juvenile grooming social networks to see what was happening during this fission process. And she did 3 years. 2021 was pre-fission. We didn't even know it was happening. 2022, they were starting to fission. By 2023, they were sleeping apart 75% of the time. And what she found is she looked at the endpoint at 2023, which subgroup were they in, and how much they were grooming within their subgroup versus between their subgroup. Now, what you can't tell from this in 2021, because this group we call PB was only about 30 individuals. The group we call WQ was over 100 individuals. So by random chance, the small group is going to end up grooming more randomly with the bigger group. But when we control for size, when we control for the different sizes of the subgroup, that was a significant difference, that PB's group were significantly grooming the juveniles within their eventual group that didn't even exist yet. And the same with WQs. And then it continued across the years. You just see it getting much more and more extreme. Now, we did only use data that was the morning after they slept together, right? So they were together, because when they sleep together, they groom in the morning quite a bit. And so we only used those data. And then this is what the grooming network looks like. Each dot represents an individual, juvenile. So this is juvenile grooming, I believe, that she did. And the lines represent like how much they groom together. The thicker line, the more they groom, and their different connectedness. And you can see 2021, it's pretty mixed up. 2022, those blue, those are the smaller group PBs, start to pull apart. And then in 2023, for those of you biologists out there, that looks like part of meiosis to me, or they're starting to pull apart there into a separate group. As of this summer 2025, now they are currently sleeping together about 98% of the time. They're coming back together, and they're cross grooming, but they still sometimes separate during the day. So we're waiting to see if they're going to come back together now that the drought's over. Okay, so putting this all together with what we know so far is we are seeing early on the development of some of the predicted differences in sex. right? We predicted that females would be grooming more than males and more likely to expand their social network, be on their maternal unit, because they're going to be there for life with all these other individuals, whereas males theoretically will transfer out. And we are also seeing that the sex differences in patterns of giving versus receiving, starting very early on. I told you the adult males mostly only receive, and when they give grooming, they're just like, okay, there you go, right? It's pretty pathetic. The one thing that is still a head scratcher is the brothers grooming each other. So I have to dig into that more. And we'll see how these results change and what more details we can get, both with analyzing the 4 years data of just the one data point per grooming bout, as well as when I'm done collecting, the focal data is in the process of being collected. So I will also be able to look at factors like other types of social interactions, like greetings are very important. And I will also be incorporating, this was in the blurb I wrote, but it hasn't been analyzed into it, indices of early life adversity, which also has human applications, that early life adversity, social and ecological stressors during infancy, we know in humans have very strong effects on mental health and social development in children later on and teens later on. And we know in baboons that people have looked at the adults, females, gone back into the long-term records to get data from when they were an infant and get these early life adversity indices and see how it affects social behavior and infant mortality and stuff as adults. But now I have data collected on these individuals from when they are infants and by the time I'm done until they hit puberty. So I can have these direct measures on early life adversity and see how we get from that infant to that older stage, how that affects that process to where we get then the fixed behaviors at adults. So those are some of the future directions with that. And which I say right here. So, and then hopefully in the future, I will be able to use the fecal samples to actually look at measures of stress, physiological measures of stress through corticosteroids and things like that, and see if these indices that we use actually are reflected in stress levels in the infants and how long it lasts through. Now I say hopefully because we are going to run out of funding to keep the project running before then if we don't get more funding, and of course funding's hard to come by these days. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. I think that I don't really have time to talk about the second part of my research. So I can stop here and take questions on the juveniles.
This might be silly, but do the older females survive past menopause like humans do, or is it the life expectancy is so short?
That's a really good question. And more we're starting to learn that this is happening in primates. So, 20 years ago when I was studying chimpanzees, I was yelling to the void that they are experiencing menopause and nobody would believe me. And now there's big sexy publications about them experiencing menopause. Just last week, a paper came out about gorillas experiencing menopause, right? If they do, it's a much shorter phase. They certainly do become less reproductively viable at a certain age. And I do see that their last infant is a little bit older, gets a little bit older before they die. Normally, they would be starting to cycle again before the infant's even weaned. That isn't happening at the old age. So if it's there, it's going to be pretty short. But I think we have enough data that if we were to look at it, we might find something. We just haven't done that yet. So it's a good question. Yes.
Can you give us a sense of how much of the time are these individuals observed? Because I know you said like when they run into a herd of elephants, you had to stop, right? Yeah. So is it typically a certain percentage of the day that you can get a snapshot of them, or
So
that might
a
look like.
typical day, they're observed from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. about. So we observe them when we get to them, they're just coming down from their sleeping site. Some of the sleeping sites we actually climb up to. We're able to access them. The one you saw in that picture, we have to wait for them to come down. So we join them at their sleeping site in the morning, and then they're followed until they head up to their sleeping site for the night. They rotate between a few different sleeping sites. So typically it's an all-day thing. And the interruptions, it changes at different times. Sometimes there's more elephants in the area than others, and we are frequently getting interrupted. Other times we won't have. We'll go months without an interruption. So typically all day, every day. Yep, 7 days a week. Yeah.
We also have a question from our online audience. First, thanking you for your presentation, and then asking, what is an appropriate distance to observe the baboons without having an effect on their normal behavior?
Right. So this varies, of course, by species and by group. Now, these individuals, other than males that transfer in, like I said, they've known us since birth, okay? And so they're quite used to us, quite comfortable with us. They behave we're just part of their environment. They either ignore us, or sometimes infants are very curious and interested in us. We do see a difference when we are following the baboons and they run into a community member, which they do. They definitely are much more afraid of community members. So we believe that they're basically behaving as they would. We try to maintain distance from them because it's just not safe, right, to be that close. They are far enough related from us that disease transmission isn't as big of a concern as, say, it would be with an ape species, but still just a safety issue, getting that close to them. And so, and we just, yeah, for just keeping them wild, it's not as good. But they sometimes don't, more often, actually, some of the individuals, they don't obey that space, like especially the infants. Like I've had incidences where I'm observing and collecting data and I feel something on my leg, and like I looked down and there was an infant licking the back of my pants. And I'm just like, and as soon as they realize they're caught, they're like, and then run. This individual behind me, her name is Taneko. She's about 2 years old in this picture, young juvenile. She was so ridiculous this summer, we had to dehabituate her because she was just grabbing people as she walked by, grabbing their legs, jumping from a rock onto people's shoulders. Like she just completely was constantly trying to be in contact, especially certain individuals who she really liked. She seemed to have a crush on this one male student. But so this picture was taken right before my collaborator Corinna then shooed her away, because she was too close. So yeah, and that's really the first we've had to do that, where we had to actively dehabituate an individual. So yeah. Yes.
Yeah, this question has to do more probably with ethics, asking it from the perspective of African research ethics.
Yeah.
And recently there's a lot of push in terms of doing research in Africa and knowledge production and community participation and engagement, because the community has to be involved
Absolutely.
in knowledge production.
Yeah.
I know you showed a slide that there were some people. Can you speak to the level of community participation or engagement in
Yeah.
your research? Yeah.
No, that's a very important question, and it's a very strong movement in primatology, decolonizing primatology, because it does have a very strong history of Americans and Europeans coming into these countries and just moving in and studying these animals. And, you know, maybe not, the locals aren't really that much more involved in, other than maybe being cooks in the camp, and, you know, it gives jobs and things like that. And so it is a very important consideration. Our observers are more than just employees to us. I don't know if that really, we rely on them for their interpretation, their information, even if they aren't researchers. We are actively recruiting Kenyan researchers to come do research. We did have one student come from Nairobi this summer, and she was great. I'm hoping she plans to come back unfortunately, most local people aren't that interested in primates, and if they are, definitely not baboons, right? But from the beginning, Shirley has been sure that she works within the community and has focused on community-based conservation because they allow us to be in their space, right? And we want to work with them and have those good relationships. I suppose it probably started just to be able to do the research. I mean, now we really feel more strongly about the importance of it beyond just being there. So that picture of the Maasai women I showed you, that is the Twala Women's Cooperative. That is a grassroots effort in the area that Shirley was the one who started with kind of financially and logistically backing it. But this one woman named Rosemary, who's the most amazing person I have ever met, really is the one who started the work. In Maasai, traditionally, they have child marriages, girls getting married at very young age, often very old men, and they also practice FGM, female genital mutilation, as well. And both those practices, Rosemary really was concerned about. And she started actually by accidentally, a girl found her. She rescued a girl from an early marriage who was 12 years old. And so then girls started coming to her for help. Eventually, then she worked to form this women cooperative for Maasai women with the goal of preserving parts of their culture they value, like traditional medicinal use and things, plant use and all things like that, while putting a stop to these harmful practices towards girls. And it now has 200 women in the community who are members, and they sign on. To be a member, you have to sign on to the bylaws that you will not have your child cut, your daughters won't be cut, and they won't be married till they finish secondary school. And so we're seeing a big shift in the community there of now even like one of the younger men I worked with, he has 2 infants now, both girls, and he said, no, they're not gonna be cut. So, we're seeing that progress. Also, the women, they get to earn an income. They get income through the cooperative in different ways, which empowers them from, first they belong to their father, then they belong to their husband. So those are some of the things. And then I've been focusing on working with the students because I want to see this next generation getting involved in the work that not necessarily we're doing, but in general with conservation around Kenya and research. So yeah, it is certainly a consideration. You come in, you're treated differently as a white person. There's a lot of still things that need to be better about that. Yep.
Yeah, I know I am very happy to see the level of student participation in this, and particularly Ainsley. And I think he spends quite a bit of time in Kenya at the research site. How is he sponsored or in terms of finance? And
right.
Yeah.
So there is some funding, internal funding at NKU. That this faculty collaborative, we were funded. Ainsley's first trip to Kenya was funded through a faculty student collaborative project, something in that order. And I just submitted one for another student to be able to come hopefully next summer. And then the student also applies for, Ainsley applied and got, and Lily, the next student, will apply for the summer research fellowship as well, to be able to support their travel expenses. That's getting there is the most expensive part, right? And getting there and paying some of the fees to stay and work on, we live on a private ranch. We have to pay the ranch owners and things like that. So that's where that money came from. We were able, as far as when she went to, after graduation, she went back to be a camp manager for us and collect data for about 6 months. She was there, and we were just able, with some soft grant money to buy her food, right, and pay fees for her, and then we reimbursed her one of her flights. She decided to go home in the middle for her sister's wedding, so we reimbursed her the 2 end flights, but no salary, you know, so it was a volunteer position. The money just isn't there for that. Yeah.
Any additional questions from our friends online? Y'all, you can have one more question.
So I was fascinated by in terms of talking about the relationships and how the juvenile and the relationship between them and their mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't hear very much about, I know you talked about the men and being passive and others,
Yeah.
but I didn't hear much about the fathers. Is it because you are not able to identify the
Yeah,
fathers?
so-
Or I didn't hear much about fathers.
So we don't know who the fathers are, because they will mate with females will during it is a multi-male, multi-female mating system. So when females are cycling and swollen, they're going to mate with a lot of different males. Males will try to go on what they call consorts, where they have consorts with females where they keep other males away from mating with her and try to mate exclusively. It's never fully successful, and it can turn over throughout any given cycle. We don't have the genetics, so we don't have paternity there. That is very expensive to do one day, we hope. So we don't have that information. We do know from other research sites that the male friends have a good probability of being the father, but aren't necessarily the father. They get other benefits from having these infants of the females with them. You know, it could be that they're trying to protect somebody who might be their offspring, but they also use the infants to protect themselves as buffers and passports, they're called. So like if one male is being charged about to be attacked by another male in some sort of conflict, he will grab his friend's small infant, especially when they're born, they're firstborn, they're born black. We call them black infants. They're those most powerful. And they'll hold the infant up as a shield. So, because the male is less likely to want to hurt an infant, right? And things like that. So they benefit in other ways from those male-female friendships that aren't just necessarily paternity. But yeah, so we, don't know.
All right. Any other questions? Y'all? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. We appreciate those of you who joined us online. Please give a round of applause for Dr. Wakefield. Next month, we'll be in the Behringer Crawford Museum with Michael Mannheimer, and he will be talking about policing and the Fourth Amendment. We hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today.